Hello and welcome. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for being here. This is the Dayton Literary Peace Prize Brunch. I'm hoping that you have enjoyed the food. Thank you very much to Brio. The Dayton Literary Peace Prize honors writers whose work uses the power of literature to foster peace, social justice, and global understanding. It was launched in 2006 and has already established itself as one of the world's most prestigious literary honors, and it is the only literary peace prize awarded in this country. As an offshoot of the Dayton Peace Prize, the Dayton Literary Peace Prize awards a $10,000 cash prize each year to one fiction and one nonfiction author whose work addresses themes of peace as solutions to conflict and leads readers to a better understanding of other cultures, peoples, religions, and political points of view. An annual Lifetime Achievement Award is also bestowed upon a writer whose body of work reflects the mission of that prize. Again, I'd like to welcome you. I'm Marcia Baumhart. I'm an anchor reporter at the NBC television affiliate here in Dayton. And I am in heaven right now. Amid all of these books, this is all that I did from the time that I could learn to read, was to read. And I wish my mother were here right now. She was so politically incorrect, having been born in the 1920s and teaching her child in the 1950s that reading makes a ready man. And now I would have to tell Mom, reading makes a ready person. I instill reading in each and every classroom that I talk to in my work as an anchor reporter, from kindergartners to college, and even to adults. And I tell kids all the time, if you want to learn, you learn to read, and everything will open to you. Reading books will take you any place you want to go without ever having to spend a dime, unless you want to buy a book, as we're going to do today, but there's always the library. It will just open so many, many doors to you. So I encourage that all the time. And I tell them, you know, if you are intimidated by books that are this thick, pick up a magazine. If it's a sports magazine, if it's a fashion magazine, words that are laced together are beautiful and they create a beautiful picture no matter what you're talking about. I'm going to give you the order of this afternoon. The authors will share information about themselves. They will provide a short reading from their work, followed by a question and answer period. A panel of prominent writers, including Ken McLean, Cullen Murphy, Catherine Voss, and Nancy Zafras, have reviewed the finalists and selected this year's winners and runners-up. Two of the writers are here with us today and will lead the question and answer portion of the morning. Also, all of you are welcome to purchase any of the books. They are set up there at the entrance, and the books will be signed by the authors. I'd like now to introduce Sharon Rad, who's the founder and co-chair of the DLPP. She's also going to welcome you and give you a little bit more about the Literary Prize and the 5th anniversary. Sharon.
Thank you, Marcia. She's so tall, isn't she? Because I'm tall. Thank you. And thank you for spending your Sunday morning with all of us. For those of you, I know I see so many familiar faces out there. You know very well what the Dayton Literary Peace Prize is, but we are in our 4th year, which means that so far we've given out 25 prizes to people from all over the world. This year we have an Australian and Marlon, of course, is from Jamaica. We've also given prizes to people from Peru and Haiti and the Dominican Republic and lots of other places, England. I mean, it's just pretty amazing that we have been so international and so quickly in our first 5 years. This year is a very special celebration because it's also the celebration of the 15th anniversary of the Dayton Peace Accords. And the reason I'm looking around sort of desperately, I know that the Deputy Mayor is here somewhere. Deputy Mayor Milosevic? Where are you? I know he's here because I saw him. Anyway, we have the mayor, the deputy mayor of Sarajevo. We are so blessed to have a number of people from Bosnia and Herzegovina who are celebrating with us this weekend. And of course, we started this Friday night with a big event at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base to commemorate the 15th anniversary of the Dayton Peace Accords, and we had a wonderful celebration there. Yesterday was an all-day forum at University of Dayton hosted by Dean Paul Benson, and there many Bosnians and people from Herzegovina spoke with us about the current conditions and the outcomes as they stand now of the Dayton Peace Accords. It was an amazing day, and hundreds of people showed up to hear those messages. So tonight, of course, is our big celebration at the Schuster Center, where we will present awards to these fabulous people. And I just want you to always keep us on your calendar, because I think we're going to be that first weekend in November. So don't go on your cruise that week, okay? And don't go visit the grandkids or whatever you're doing, and keep us in your hearts and minds for that weekend, because I think we will always be here at Books & Co., and we will always have a big celebration. So thank you for joining us this morning. I'm very, very pleased.
Just before you meet the panel members individually, I would like Geraldine Brooks to approach, please. We have something very special for you from Ohio, from the state, from the Lieutenant Governor Lee Fisher. A proclamation. In the name of, and by the authority of, the state of Ohio, Lee Fisher, Lieutenant Governor, Geraldine Brooks, Dayton Literary Peace Prize Lifetime Achievement Award. It is my privilege, on behalf of the citizens of Ohio, to congratulate you as you are honored for your work to advance peace through literature. Your writings have illuminated history and culture for all who have the pleasure of reading your work. I thank you for your efforts to promote understanding, and I offer my best wishes for all of your future endeavors. Congratulations on this achievement, Lee Fisher, Lieutenant Governor. Now to introduce the panel. You just met Geraldine Brooks. Geraldine here, Marlon James, and Dave Eggers. Geraldine Brooks, the 2010 Lifetime Achievement Award winner. Australian-born, an author and journalist, grew up in the western suburbs of Sydney and attended Bethlehem College, Ashfield, and the University of Sydney. She was awarded the Pulitzer Prize in Fiction in 2006, this for her novel, March. Her first novel, Year of Wonders, is an international bestseller, and People of the Book is a New York Times bestseller translated into 20 languages. She is also the author of the nonfiction works 9 Parts of Desire and Foreign Correspondence. Geraldine Brooks.
So now I have to tell you something that you don't know about me, is that right? I'll tell you 2 things you might not know about me. One is that I was an Ohioan briefly. I lived on South Moreland Boulevard in Cleveland and had the pleasure of visiting Dayton on a number of occasions to cover your utility, Dayton Power and Light. That was one of the companies that I was assigned to when I was working at the Wall Street Journal. So I have very fond memories of Dayton. Also because my husband and I courted here a little bit. We would come down for a weekend in Dayton when Cleveland got too much. I want to tell you something else that you might not know about me, but it's an experience probably everybody in this room shares with me, which is the first encounter with that book that absolutely transports you and carries you away. I was 9 years old when that happened to me, and the book in question was by the English children's author Enid Blyton, and it was called The Valley of Adventure. And this was the book that turned me from the obedient daughter who did everything my parents asked of me to the naughty kid reading under the blanket after lights out had been called. And from the very diligent schoolgirl to the kid who, instead of memorizing the rivers of New South Wales, was reading under the desk. And when I finished the book, I was delighted to see that it was one in a series of 7 adventure books that Enid Blyton had written, so I couldn't wait for Saturday to come, because Saturday was library day in my family. And my sister and I would go with our parents, and we'd all come home with our stack of books for the week. But unfortunately, Black Day, the library didn't have any more of the adventure series, so I was very disheartened. But the gods were smiling, because that very weekend in the children's section of the Sunday paper, there was a for sale in the children's classifieds, and somebody was offering the whole series for sale. We didn't have a lot of money when I was growing up, and the modest asking price seemed exorbitant to me, so I was a bit reluctant to raise it with my parents, but I finally plucked up the courage and told my mother. And I learned something about my parents that day, which was that for them, books were in a special class of thing, like food and school uniforms, that you found the money for. So they bought me the books, and the day they arrived, I was so excited. They were beautiful hardcovers with wonderful dust jackets. They'd all been covered carefully in plastic, and I lined them up on the dining room table in series order. And I started to feel strange. My heart was beating. I was flushed in the neck. I could barely swallow. And it wasn't a feeling I'd had before. It wasn't unpleasant exactly, but it was different. And I didn't have a word for it. So I was 9 then, and I didn't have that feeling again until I was 15. And then it was in a very different context. And by then I had a name for it. And that name would be lust. But I always think that the fact that I felt my first stirring of physical desire for a bunch of used books might have been predictive of my ultimate destiny as a novelist. And so there's something you didn't know. The kind of fiction that I feel drawn to write is stories from the past where you can know something and you can't know everything. So you can follow the line of fact, but when that point when the record falls silent, there's a void, and you fill it with imagination. And it seems like I'm always drawn to write about what happens to people in a time of catastrophe. And was pointed out to me at one of the readings, there was somebody sitting with their hand up, and she was obviously dying to ask a question, and this was when March had just come out. That was my second novel, and her question was, why did both your novels have vicars in them? And it was true, you know, Mr. March is a chaplain to the Union troops, and one of the leading characters in my first novel, Year of Wonders, is the rector of the village where bubonic plague comes. And I thought to myself, geez, it's lucky she doesn't know what I'm working on now, because what I was working on then was People of the Book, which not only had a vicar, but it had a priest and a rabbi and an imam. So I don't know why I am drawn to write about religious figures, but my next book, I'm afraid, also has a vicar in it. So anyway, I'm just going to read you something that seemed to me the thing that is most relevant to the Peace Prize. And it's the part in March where the voice changes from Mr. March, who's away down south where the fighting is. And it's his wife when she comes. She's been called to his bedside. And as a writer, I had to follow the lead that Louisa May Alcott had given me about what happened to Mr. March. And in Little Women, he's away at war, and then Mommy is called to his bedside because he's seriously ill and in danger of death. And because this is a first-person narrative, I couldn't leave the narration with Mr. March once he's in this near-death state, unless I wanted to go into some kind of experimental writing that I didn't quite feel capable of doing, of the rantings of a delirious man. So it gave me an opportunity to do something else, which was to switch to Mommy's point of view and to let you see how the marriage looked. We'd seen how it looked to Mr. March, but we hadn't seen how it looked to her. But I was writing this in Sydney during the drumbeat for the Iraq War. And that was very much informing my thinking in the section that I'm going to read to you now. So this is Mommy, but there's a little bit of Geraldine Brooks in there too. I told him to go. I didn't cry at our parting. I said that I was giving my best to the country I love, and kept my tears till he was gone, and shed them in private. I told the girls we had no right to complain when we each of us had merely done our duty and will surely be happier for it in the end. They were hollow words then, and all the more so now, for what happiness will there be if he dies in this wretched place? What happiness even if he recovers? It is quieter here now that the bustle of the day's routines has begun to ebb. The seconds tick by, marked by the drip of the drenching water cooling the dressings of the wounded. In the sickly yellow glare of the gaslight, I gaze at his face. For what else have I to do here? I study him and wonder where the face has gone that I love so much. The face that belied his age when I first saw him, all on fire, in my brother's pulpit. I thought then that it was rare to hear such ferocious words issuing from such a benign visage. He looked like an angel such as the Italians sometimes paint, all golden hair and gold bronze skin, youthful and venerable at one at the same time, his expression informed by a passionate nature that spoke of both innocence and experience. And all those years later, as I watched him going off to war, at the ridiculous age of 39, he looked young to me still. When I caught glimpses of him, smiling and waving among the press at the windows of the departing troop car, I thought that there were boy soldiers all around him who wore their age more heavily than he. It was folly to let him go, unfair of him to ask it of me, and yet one is not permitted to say such a thing. It is just one more in the long list of things that a woman must not say. A sacrifice such as his is called noble by the world, but the world will not help me put back together what war has broken apart. Aunt March was the only one of all of us who dared to utter the truth. When I got her note wrapped around the money I was obliged to beg of her to pay for this journey, I read it and burned it. I saw Hannah's eyes on me as I balled up the paper and cast it into the grate. She thought I was angry with Aunt March. The truth, I was angry at myself for not having had the courage to stand aside from the crying up of this war and say, no, not this way. You cannot right injustice by injustice. You must not defame God by preaching that he wills young men to kill one another. For what manner of God could possibly will what I see here? There are Confederates lying in this hospital, they say. So there is union at last, a United States of pain. Did God will the Milltown lad in the next ward to be shot, or to run a steel blade through the bowels of the farmhand who now lies next to him? A poor youth, maybe, who never kept a slave. But I said none of this a year ago, when it might have mattered.
The 2010 fiction winner, Marlon James, born in Kingston, Jamaica. His first novel, John Crow's Devil, was a finalist for the Los Angeles Times Book Prize, the Commonwealth Writers' Prize, and was a New York Times Editor's Choice. The novel was published in the United Kingdom, Germany, and Italy in 2008. A new novel, The Book of Night Women, was published by Riverhead Books in 2009. He has taught at the Calabash International Literary Festival Workshop in Kingston, Jamaica for 2 years. More recently, he has taught at the Gotham Writers Workshop in New York City and was a judge for the Pen Beyond Margins Award. Presently a professor of literature and creative writing at Macalester College in St. Paul, Minnesota. He sets foot down in Jamaica, New York City, and the Twin Cities, and is hesitant to say he actually lives anywhere. Marlon James.
Roberto Bolaño says a writer's only home is a bookstore. So I'll just say that. I'm trying to think of two things that you may not know about me. And what are the two? It's funny, I'm trying to find what's a common thread all writers have in common, and after hearing Geraldine, I'm convinced it's Enid Blyton. Because I had those books And I got them by far less legal means than you did. Okay, I had a shoplifting issue. I wasn't told you were actually supposed to pay for books in a bookstore. Let me stop right there. Two things. I was going to say one is that I cry at movies that do not need crying. You don't want to see what happened to me at the end of Remember the Titans. I lost it. If I start talking about Stand By Me now, I'll be the moment. One thing, I think that when I talk about books, usually I talk about the books that made me want to write and the books that sort of galvanized me as an adult. Jessica Hajidorn's Dog Eaters and Salman Rushdie's Shame, Gabriel Garcia Marquez's Love in a Time of Cholera, and so on. But these aren't the books that made me read books. These aren't the books that made me realize that there was this huge world that was there every time I opened a book. And for those, and I thought about what are the books or the stories that really made me want to do this, made me think, this is the most exciting thing ever and it's all mine. And I realized it was 4 books. Well, one wasn't a book, one was X-Men, the X-Men comic. And I'm a huge fan of X-Men to the point where I can tell you what happened in episode 175. That's when I went to Japan. But the idea of these sort of outcasts, you know, what's the line is, what is it? Feared and hated by the world they've sworn to protect. And as a complete and total nerd, who was a complete feared and hated by the world he was living in, that really, really struck a chord with me. Another one, and I didn't think about this until 2 days ago, was Laura Ingalls Wilder's Little House in the Big Woods. I was a big fan of Little House on the Prairie, even though people kept dying and Mary got blind, and I hated them for that. But Little House in the Big Woods, I remember when I first read that book, and I was stunned that I was liking it, because it was the first book I read with no pictures, which always struck me as a very cruel joke. Like, why would anybody read a book without pictures? That makes no sense. And Little House in the Big Woods was one of the first books. The second is a book that I don't think a lot of people know of now, called The Railway Children. That was one. And Charles King's is The Water Babies, which was a huge deal for me. So those are the books that turned literature into this world of wonder. For me, which is why I'm such a big, I love children's fiction too much to ever attempt to write one. And I'm such a huge defender of children's fiction and young adult fiction, because I remember that time, that day when that whole world sort of exploded in my face. Okay, that's a really violent imagery for a Peace Prize. But that probably, because I think I rarely talk about the book I read as a really young child. So that's something a lot of people don't know. I was at a Brooklyn book fair a couple of years ago, and the panel, the chair of the panel challenged us to read the most dangerous section in our novels. And I thought about this for a while, because not a lot of happy things happen in my book. And I thought, given the time period and given the stakes, what was the most dangerous scene in the book? So I'm going to read it. Don't worry, nobody gets killed in this scene. And that's saying something for this book. What you should know, the 2 characters in the scene, one is named Homer. Most of the characters in the book are named off characters in Greek culture and Greek mythology. You'll have to buy it to find out why. And in this scene, Homer is a head slave, and she's coming down to see Lilith, who is the main character in the story. And this is an exchange between the 2 of them. The entire thing is told in 18th century slave dialect, so you can always nod and pretend you're understanding if you know it. I do that, and it's my book. So it starts, Homer go down to the cellar one night and wake Lilith up. Homer buy her clothes and Lilith don't like it. Homer pulled out something from her apron. You know what this be, child? Me didn't born behind cow, you know. It's a book they call it. You don't say. It's since when you lay eye upon a book. I always see it, but I never touch. Then touch it then. Homer handed the book to Lilith, and she take it in her fingers. Lilith expecting something like a dress or a jewel box, that easy to break like any other thing. The book hard and soft at once. The cover, when she run her fingers over it, feel like linen or Osnaburg. But the book also hard like wood and thick. The book red like wine or blood. She never feel or smell anything like that ever. A scent like oil or dust or something else. All of them smelling something awful apart, but together make the most wonderful thing. Lilith closed her eye and breathed in the smell like tobacco. Even better when you open it, Homer say. Lilith opened the book. The leaves white in the center, but get browner to the edge. She shut it back quick. Why you bring this down here? Me not fool you know. Me know that Robert Quinn would kill we if him suey. You have more sense than me did think. Why you think that be so, my child? Because it's white people things. Reading is white people things. Negro not to care about them things. Homer laughed. Then you's a real Negro for sure. Let me tell you something, and you listen good. You see this book, as long as you can't read, man have all sort of power over you. So when me can read chain going break, you's one perplexing slave in a Homer. Anybody ever tell you? Me not nobody's slave. Learn this. When you can make out a word, nothing the master can tell you will surprise you. A Negro, he got nothing. He got nothing. But when you can make out a word, that is something indeed. You know how long me know the master was coming? You think about that. When a Negro can read, she can plan, even if it's just for a minute. Let me tell you something else about reading. You see this? Every time you open this, you get free. Freeness up in here, and nobody even have to know you get free but you. If the master find out you can't read, you're dead. If the master supposed to spoil, you're dead. What be the difference? You're supposed to answer that? It name question, child. Man is beast either way. Nothing you can change about him. But you can change plenty about you. Regard that a while. You're not a fool and you're not common. You remember that. Lilith quiet for a while, the darkness telling her nothing. What the book name? Joseph Andrews. Henry Fielding write it. British man. That don't sound like nothing. You just wait. So Homer commenced teaching Lilith how to read. Lilith don't know why her, but glad to have a new feeling rise in her when she see a letter shape into something when it's in front of her. A cup was something she could hold and pour tea into, but a cup was also a CUP. And when she hold her hand steady, she could write it plain for Homer to see. Homer nod her head and show her a SAUCER. Lilith begin to see how reading and writing work, and how you can write a thing and give it to a slave, and nobody can hear what you say, even if the only thing you write is the black cat sit on the mat. Writing be silent talking, and Lilith like to have something that nosy slave can't overhear. And that Joseph Andrews, that rascal. Seems that all man have to do is bide him time and keep him place, and everywhere he trip, he going land right between woman's legs. Black woman hard to laugh, for she keep it secret and quiet like. Homer read the book and Lilith clutch her side and try not to laugh, and get a pain because she laughing so hard. I am afraid, said Lady Booby, he's a wild young fellow. That he is, said Slipslop, and a wicked one too. To my knowledge, he games, drinks, swears and fights eternally. Besides, he's horribly addicted to wenching. Aye, said the lady, I've never heard that of him. Oh, madam, answered the other, he's so lewd a rascal that if your ladyship keeps him much longer, you will not have one virgin in the house, except myself. And yet, I can't see what a wench is seeing him, to be so foolishly fond as they are. In my eyes, he's as ugly a scarecrow as I've ever upheld. That wild fellow son at Robert Quinn, Lilith say. What news you have about Robert Quinn? My ears is as good at night as yours, Homer. They both laugh. How you come by book learning? You just a common Negro. Nothing common about me, child, or you neither. How you come by book learning? Jack Wilkins' sister, she teach me. That be a long time ago. Every time her governess teach her 2 words, she find me working in the house and drag me away to teach me. And the master never know. No master live here them times. That girl was a wicked little bitch. But she teach me how perfume read and how it write. P-E-R-F-U-M-E. And how one letter put next to another letter change how they sound. What happened to she? Dead from consumption her 15 year. She did always sickly. Lilith start to wonder why Homer helping herself. Maybe she feels sorry over that matter with her mother, but that was a long time ago. Homer come in the dark to teach her to read, but she look at her too long. And she keep wiping things off Lilith's face, even sweat, and touching her face and giving her extra Ossenberg cloth for monthly, and for those days when that get heavy. And talking to her about how she must take care of herself because she busting out of her own dress. And talking to her like she be a young'un. Lilith start to wonder what Homer really desire. Thank you.
Thank you, Harlan James. The 2010 nonfiction winner, Dave Eggers. Dave Eggers is the author of 7 books. His book, What is the What?, was a finalist for the 2006 National Book Critics Circle Award and winner of a literary award in France. That book, about Valentino Achek Ding, a survivor of the civil war in southern Sudan, gave birth to the Valentino Achek Ding Foundation that is run by Mr. Ding and dedicated to building secondary schools in southern Sudan. Mr. Eggers' most recent book, Say Tune, was awarded the American Book Award, the Los Angeles Times Book Award, the Northern California Book Award, the Robert F. Kennedy Distinguished Honor, and the Muslim Public Affairs Council's Media Award. In 2002, with Nineveh Caligari, he co-founded 826 Valencia, a nonprofit writing and tutoring center for youth in the Mission District of San Francisco. Dave Eggers.
Hi. I want to say first, thank you so much for being here. I'm really incredibly honored for the award, the Dayton Literary Peace Prize. This means the world to me, and I just want to thank everyone for inventing this award in the first place, and I feel like it's such a perfect place for it. To be here in Dayton. I'm from not too far away in Illinois, and I feel like I've been to every corner of Ohio over the years, and so I think it could be no more appropriate place for such an amazing prize. Something that you don't know, my first book was a memoir, and so I feel like I laid it all out there. There's not much left to tell, unfortunately. I will say that I am an amateur barber. I cut my hair this morning at the hotel. I had to borrow scissors from the front desk, and Marla and I were talking about what you do with those things that, only we see them, when there's one stray hair out there, but I had to do some work on the hair this morning. And if anybody out there has hair cutting needs, I'm not licensed. This guy, yeah, I could do some work there, sure. I'm not licensed, but I am enthusiastic, and I will innovate on your head. Yeah, so that's, I guess, something. But, and I used to bring scissors with me, and now you can't bring the scissors with you. I used to bring them on the plane, and anyway, I'm going to talk a little bit. The book Say Tune started, we have a series, we have a little publishing company in San Francisco, and one of the things we do is publish a series called Voice of Witness, and it's a series that uses oral history to illuminate human rights crises around the world. And we saw it originally that we thought that the series would take place mostly, we thought the first book would be out of Sudan, and the next one Zimbabwe, the next one, one of our editors had done work in Srebrenica, but when we began thinking about it and talking to people, the first 2 books, just by a series of serendipitous events, took place here in the US. The first was about wrongfully convicted men and women in the US, and later exonerated, and the second, while that book was being published, Katrina hit, and we collected narratives from dozens of New Orleanians and their experiences before and during and after the storm. And one of the stories in that book that became Voices from the Storm was that of the Zaytoun family. And this is a Syrian-American man who married a woman that grew up in Baton Rouge. They raised their kids in New Orleans. They moved to New Orleans. They have a family there. They started a business together, a painting and contracting business that thrived over 15 or so years, and they built a very prosperous life together. And when the hurricane came, Zaytoun never left in advance of any storm, and he wasn't going to leave in front of this one. So he stayed to look after his property and the property of all of his clients. He had keys to hundreds of homes in the city because everyone trusted him with their home. And most of his neighbors and friends knew that he always stayed, and they said, okay, well, you're going to look after our property if anything happens. And so he stayed, and he, I'm going to read from the first, one of the first nights. This takes place Wednesday, August 31st. He lives in Uptown. The water came up in his neighborhood on Tuesday, and this is the first morning that he wakes up and sees his neighborhood flooded and his home underwater. Zaytoun woke with the sun and crawled out of his tent. He was, I'm going to keep doing this, interrupting myself. It was so hot, and he lives in a two-story house, and he had about 8 feet of water, and he it was so hot in his home that he was living in a tent on his roof. The day was bright, and as far as he could see in any direction, the city was underwater. Though every resident of New Orleans imagines great floods, knows that such a thing is possible in a city surrounded by water and ill-conceived levees, the sight in the light of day was beyond anything he had imagined. He could think only of Judgment Day, of Noah and 40 days of rain. And yet it was so quiet, so still, nothing moved. He sat on the roof and scanned the horizon, looking for any person, any animal or machine moving. Nothing. As he did his morning prayers, a helicopter broke the silence, shooting across the treetops and heading downtown. Zaytoun looked down from the roof to find the water at the same level as the night before. He felt some relief in knowing that it would likely remain there or even drop a foot once it reached an equilibrium with Lake Pontchartrain. Zaytoun sat beside his tent, eating cereal he had salvaged from the kitchen. Even with the water no longer rising, he knew he could do nothing at home. He had saved what he could save, and there was nothing else to do here until the water was ceded. When he had eaten, he felt restless, trapped. The water was too deep to wade into, its contents too suspect to swim through. But there was the canoe. He saw it floating above the yard, tethered to the house. Amid the devastation of the city, standing on the roof of his drowned home, Zaytoun felt something like inspiration. He imagined floating alone through the streets of his city. In a way, this was a new world, uncharted. He could be an explorer. He could see things first. He climbed down the side of the house and lowered himself into the canoe. He untied the rope and set out. He paddled down Dark Street, the water flat and clear. And strangely, almost immediately, Zaytoun felt at peace. The damage to the neighborhood was extraordinary, but there was an odd calm in his heart. So much had been lost, but there was a stillness to the city that was almost hypnotic. He coasted away from his home, passing over bicycles and cars, their antennae scraping the bottom of his canoe. Every vehicle, old and new, was gone, unsalvageable. The numbers filled his head. There were 100,000 cars lost in the flood, maybe more. What would happen to them? Who would take them once the waters receded? In what hole could they all be buried? Almost everyone he knew had left for a day or two, expecting little damage. He passed by their homes, so many of which he painted and even helped build, calculating how much was lost inside. It made him sick, the anguish this would cause. No one he knew had prepared for this adequately or at all. And so he sets out in his canoe that day and picks up a neighbor a few blocks down, and he and the neighbor start looking around the neighborhood and just to see who else is there and see the damage done. And almost within the first few hours, they encounter, they hear a cry for help, a faint cry behind a door, and they try to locate where it's coming from. They finally find the house. They hear it behind the door, the woman's cry for help. Zaytoun jumps out of the boat, swims to the front door. The door is swollen shut. He bangs it, kicks it, and finally gets the door open, and there he finds a woman in her 80s floating up near the ceiling, her dress floating on the surface of the water, and she's holding on to a bookshelf, and she'd been there over 24 hours. And he and his neighbor are able, through a long series of events, to rescue this woman. And at that moment, he's totally convinced that he's been put in New Orleans, in that place, at that time, for a reason. And Zaytoun sees, you know, everything that is happening for a reason and part of God's plan. But he's absolutely sure that he stayed in New Orleans for a reason, that he didn't flee in front of the storm for a reason, that he's been put in his home for a reason, that he had a canoe that he had bought secondhand and made fun of by his wife. What are you going to do with that canoe? But here's the reason to have bought that canoe. So, and he's so electrified by the ability to save a life and to help people that that's what he does in ever-widening circles for the next week, is canoe around the city, mostly alone, listening for people that might need his help. And while there's fan boats and motorboats and helicopters and other vehicles that are making an incredible din and not able to hear necessarily those that are trapped in attics and on roofs, he can hear them. And he brings water and he brings aid to people. And he does this for a week, and every day he tells his wife Kathy, who's staying in Baton Rouge, I'm going to call you at noon every day to tell you I'm okay. And she says, please leave the city. And he says, I'm needed here, I'm wanted here. And she says, we'll call every day at noon, and he does, and every day he does that until after 1 week, Kathy's waiting for the call, doesn't get the call. Noon passes, no call. 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. Days pass, eventually 3 weeks go by during which she doesn't hear from her husband, and she can only presume that he has succumbed to the violence that we heard so much about, or the roving gangs of armed men that we heard so much about. But what really happened to Zaytoun during that particular moment in time said a lot about where we were as a nation, and where we were in terms of our priorities and our mindset. And I'll leave it right there in that cliffhanging stage. Thank you very much.
We were just talking about that in the beginning, about how words bring pictures to you, and each and every one of these authors has certainly brought pictures to all of us here today. Thank you so much for your presentations and for sharing a little bit, some couple of rascals we have here, huh? We have Geraldine, who was sneaking under the covers reading, and her mother thought she was asleep. I have a young man right back there who does the same thing. I finally stopped checking and said, he's reading, it doesn't matter. Comic book enthusiast and a barber. Talented group. This is wonderful, thank you so much. We're just getting ready to set up for the Q&A. And as we told you that there was a panel of writers that looked over, that reviewed these finalists and selected the winners and the runners-up, and Ken McLean, Cullen Murphy, Catherine Vaz, and Nancy Zaffris, two of whom are with us today. I'm going to tell you first a little bit about Catherine Vaz, who grew up in San Francisco's East Bay area, graduating from UC Santa Barbara, but spent her senior year studying at the University of Sussex, England. She was a freelance writer in Los Angeles, and I believe we were there at the same time, Catherine. You were freelancing and I was working for a TV station there, but freelancing in LA is very, very different. You work every day. When we hear freelance in Ohio, you think, oh, you just work every now and then. But in LA, that's how people make their living every day. In fact, for her first novel, actress Marlee Matlin bought the rights to create a film. Telling you a little bit about Ken McLean. One instructor at Cornell University lamented having to teach a class after Ken McLean's class, because he said the students from McLean's class would come in. They were so excited and geeked from having come to his class, and he would try to teach them, and they would look at him like, oh, come on, you're not McLean. You know? So we have to be in this room, and you know, they, in their minds, probably would much rather have been back with the Professor McLean. So I'm going to ask them to approach. The two of you, please. Ken McLean, Catherine Vaz. And they are going to begin our Q&A session. I'm going to share a microphone here. I think, is this one going to be okay with this one that's here on the table? Technical assistant? Oh, that's for you. Okay, I'm sorry. We'll just have to pass it.
Project.
Okay, this does work. I'm delighted to be here and to be with such wonderful, distinguished, amazing writers, and I'm enjoying listening to them so much that I want to say as little as possible. So I thought I would just throw out an initial question that is borrowing one of Geraldine's wonderful phrases, and see if I can find it. Where you described something that you call the lovely incomplete scaffold to build on. And I think all the writers here are dealing with things of a historical period or combining research with their fiction. And of course in Geraldine's novel, there's an arc with the character Hannah, who goes through her own sense of discovery and uncovering of mysteries in her own life, while she finds little traces of people like a insect wing or a wine stain that turns out to also be a blood stain, salt crystal, and that out of these little germs, these entire chapters and people evolve, and she does also throughout the book at the same time. So I'm wondering, maybe Geraldine, you can start us off, and then maybe Marlon and Dave can add something to the idea of how do you take that incomplete scaffold, and what is it like to build on?
So, I think people always like to know where you get the idea for your novels, and I always liked what Ernest Hemingway said about that. He said an idea for a novel can be something that you're lucky enough to overhear, or it can be the wreck of your whole damn life. And I think he would like the idea for People of the Book was something that I overheard in a bar. And a bar in a war zone at that. So I think Hemingway would probably approve of getting your idea that way. But what I heard was about this illuminated Hebrew manuscript from 14th century Spain that was missing during the siege of Sarajevo, and its fate was uncertain, and journalists loved to speculate and gossip, and that was what I overheard, was all these theories about what had happened to this this Hebrew book, and you know, the Israeli commandos had taken it. No, it had been sold by the beleaguered Bosnian government on the black market because they needed money to buy arms. Well, the true story was that a Muslim librarian had risked his life and gone in under intense shelling to bring this book to safety at the beginning of the war, and as a result, it is still there as a symbol of the survival of the multi-ethnic ideal of Sarajevo. But for me, to fill in that scaffolding, I always have to hear a voice. And I was going to have a Bosnian book conservator working on this book. And I just couldn't get her voice right. Sarajevans have a very unique way of expressing themselves. It's very multi-layered. There's a kind of an Ottoman politesse there. There's a kind of a Slavic soulfulness there. There's this kind of deep cynicism from having to shift under a sort of a socialist regime for a while. And at the time I was there was also an overlay of deep, deep sadness. But also a kind of modern wit. Anyway, I wasn't a good enough writer to get this. And I had been about 80 pages of that particular character, and I'm sitting there scratching my head and going, well, what voice can I hear? What voice can I hear? And then I thought, Struth, g'day. I know a voice I can hear. So I made my conservator Australian. But the consequence of that was that she just wasn't there to fill in the scaffolding and be this polite person who came on and presented the conundrum of the different periods of the book's history and then politely left. I don't know if any of you have any Australian friends, and if you've ever invited them to stay with you for a weekend, and 2 months later they're still on the couch. So she kind of barged into the book and demanded her whole own plot. So I had my beautiful structure that I thought about how each little artifact in the binding would take you on a trip back in time, but then I also ended up with this story of this Australian woman as well that I had never intended to have. So that's how books can run away, and you can end up filling in the scaffolding in ways that you didn't even anticipate.
My story is actually pretty similar. I will have these very ornate plans and these over-plotted books, and it always gets shot to hell when that character shows up. And it's always that character who's like, I know you've been thinking it was your book all this time, but. And this book was really interesting because I started out writing it in really perfect Queen's English. I'm a total Victorian lit nerd, so I can slip into that language quite quickly. And that's how it was. The book started, and there was a chapter where somebody was just simply talking to somebody about this woman named Lilith. And it was just supposed to be like 6 pages before I get back to the Queen's English. Well, the Prince Regent, if we were going to get really, really particular. And I started writing it, and it just went on for like 400, 500, 600 pages, because this Lilith would not shut up. It was just her book. And there's a type of discussion writers will have with each other that if you are paying attention, you'll think we're talking about real people. And a friend of mine was saying, yeah, Lilith shows up and she won't leave. I said, well, you have to let her stay. I said, no, I'm not letting her stay. And when you realize we're talking about fictional characters, you go, writers are nuts. But she, so I think it's not so much I guess you could call it a germ, but I've had, and it still happens, where regardless of where a book is going, a character shows up who refuses to leave. And it's like, I'm not leaving until you write the story. And then, even then, it was fine. I'll write the story in my way. And it was, no, you're going to write it my way. Because the dialect is one thing I actually resisted for at least 100 pages until, I just sort of had a huge argument with this character. And basically, it was like, you can't tell the story better than I could. Yes, I know I'm sort of, it sounds like I'm schizo. Which writers are. But that's what happens for me most of the time. And I've come to the point where I've started to look forward to it, a sort of character who will come in and totally rock the world and shake everything up, because they're usually way better at telling a story. Yeah.
Well, the beauty of nonfiction is that you know the whole story before you start, and the sentence by sentence writing isn't all that fun, I think, because you can't go very far without checking back, with exactly what happened or being able to verify that somewhere else. And so it's kind of a slog, but you know where the story is going, and you know where it ends, and there's a comfort in that. But after writing Zaytoun, and I thought, okay, for sure I'm going to write fiction next, and I'm working on a book right now that started with a very loose scaffolding and sort of an idea that I had heard from, an anecdote that I'd heard from somebody, and I thought, yes, I'm free, and I get to write anything I want to write. But there's this, I keep having this itch to call like Zaytoun and say, what happened next, because I don't know. And it takes a lot of filling in, and I find that I've become very reliant on knowing where a story begins and the middle and the end, and I have to sort of build back those muscles of just being able to make something up. And I'm really in the middle of struggling with that right now, because I've got about 75 pages and I don't know what happened for the rest of it. So any ideas would be welcome. During the signing period, please come up and you can just jot some things down. Thank you.
By the way, let me say that it is a tremendous delight to be here and among friends. And that's both readers and people who care, obviously, very powerfully about living in a world that I think will outlast, hopefully, our sitting here and generations later. I wanted to ask a question of Dave, and I will ask it of other people. I was the nonfiction judge, and it was, I must admit, I have to tell you this. I've published 8 books of poems and 2 books of essays, and it means that I'm always going to look for the poetry in everything. And every writer here, right, would make Longinus delighted, right? You all instruct and delight, and the prose, as you can see, is magnificent. But There is a moment, I think, in any book where you have to create, obviously, that bond with the reader, and it has to do with creating what we call, for want of a better term, and ensuring your authority, so that we can trust you. It seemed to me in Zaytun that actually happens very quickly, and it happens, those of you who don't know this book, buy it. You need to buy all of these books, otherwise your life has been diminished. But there's a moment in there where you talk about Zaytun painting a rainbow on all his vans. And I would argue at that moment, we learn all we need to know to make, in some sense, our pact with him. Does that seem right?
You know, that's an anecdote that I think people keep on bringing up, and it resonates with people, and it came totally by accident, the answer, because we spent like 3 years getting to know each other, and so many of the best details of that book came out of not interviews or not me thinking of a question to ask them. It was time spent just chatting, because Kathy especially will just chat you up, and we just spent. It all started with, like, I would schedule an interview with Zaytun and thought the book was mostly about him, and then he's always an hour and a half late. So I would be in the living room with the family and with Kathy, and we would just start talking about other things, and then Kathy's role in the book grew because of all that time spent together, and she's such an amazing storyteller, and the book wouldn't exist without her. And then it was asking about the origin of the logo. They have a logo that's just a paintbrush at the end of a rainbow. So sort of saying, if you want your house painted, we have all the colors that you could choose from, you know? But, so I just asked a very innocuous question of Kathy one day. I just said, well, where'd you come up with that logo? I didn't think it was that important. And she thought I meant something else. She says like, oh, that logo. Oh my God, it was such a big deal. Because when they put it on all the vans, for a little while, some of their employees and some of their clients assumed that it was a gay painting company, and that the employees were only, you had to be gay to be employed there, and that your clients, they catered to only gay clients or something. And so it was such a, I don't know if there are such companies, you know, like, but anyway, there was this weird assumption. So they had a few employees quit, and they had clients say, well, we don't want the gay painting company, I guess we want the straight painting company. And, but, so they had this crisis because they had it all over the vans, on benches, and all their signs, and she said, well, there we had to think about it, like, what are we gonna do? We're gonna change all this stuff? And that's when Zaytun stepped up, and he's like, you know, anybody that has a problem with gays is definitely going to have a problem with a company run by Muslims. So the logo stays. And I love that about them too, because, you know, I knew that they were incredibly welcoming of people, of all people, and that they had friends from every walk of life, and their best friends are a gay couple that they met when they were painting their house. And I thought, but I thought that illustrates it better than anything else. And those little anecdotes that come about by accident end up being those things that sort of endear people to your subjects or characters more than anything that you could state, you know, and say, like these people. No, it's like, here's something that they did. And they're all about deeds, you know, more so than words. And so I think you learn a lot by these little things. But thanks. Oh, is that first?
Yeah.
Oh.
I was so enthralled in listening to the answer that I forgot the question.
I was just asking how you ensure your authority.
Oh my goodness. I don't know that I ever feel that authoritative, to tell you the truth.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't ever do a creative writing class. I never expected to be a novelist. When I was 8 years old, I decided I was going to be a journalist. My father was working as a proofreader, wonderful thing that they don't have anymore, on the Sydney newspaper, and it was a big day because we didn't go into the city very much, but I had a dentist appointment or an orthodontist or some darn thing in town, and I went to visit my dad in his workplace, and it was in the days when the printing press was down in the basement of the newspaper, and I was there when the afternoon paper the presses started up. And we went down to see the presses rolling, and it's a most unbelievable sight. These huge rolls of newsprint spinning so fast. You've all seen it on the movies, but the feeling of the floor vibrating and the ink in the hair and the smell of it. And then my dad reached onto the conveyor belt and pulled off one of the first editions of the paper, and he handed it to me, and it was warm in my hand, hot off the presses. And it was that moment when there's some expression that you've heard all your life, and it's suddenly you're connected with the real meaning. And I knew that I was privileged to be the first to know the news of my city that day, and so I wanted to be a journalist, and it's all I ever wanted to be. So the novel thing came late and unexpectedly to me, and I don't really have a sense of taking control of my reader. I write instinctively. I don't really plan the novels. I write what I would like to read and throw it out there and hope that somebody wants to put out a hand and catch it.
That's a good question about authority, because there are 10 women in my novel. And I'm not a woman. And I really had to do the reverse. I had to really relinquish authority. And it happened, there's a scene in the novel where 6 of these women are talking in a cave, and it's all them talking. I don't know, the quickest way to ruin it would for me to come in as a narrator and like, and in the cave, woman number 1 said. I really had to let that go, and that was a hard fight. You wouldn't want to be part of the discussions I had with people about it. Well, it's my book, and so on. I think at some point you actually, the only way you gain this sort of authority over the authority that I think readers read in prose is the authority that you relinquish to the character. Because you can tell, and you've all read it, a book that never loses this feel of being written. And that's what you do not want in fiction. You want to be transported to a world. You don't want to be, well, that sentence was good, but the other sentence wasn't as good. The whole point to reading is to forget the words and be sort of lost in the world. So it was definitely the opposite. It was just relinquishing that.
Forgive me, but just if we could, please, we want to make sure we have time for the audience to ask questions. So I don't want to cut into what you all are doing
No,
here.
we were gonna open it up right now.
Okay, all right. Questions? Did someone raise? If I see you waving.
Somebody back there, yeah.
Somebody back there.
I wanted to ask about the peace aspect of this prize. When someone says the word peace, what do you see? What's your vision of peace?
Geraldine.
When somebody says the word peace, I think about war, unfortunately. Another thing that I never intended to do was become a war correspondent, and Way really does lead on to Way. Having set out to be a journalist, I was thinking maybe a genteel cultural beat, perhaps with a little restaurant reviewing involved in it. And I ended up covering, I think, 6 wars and 3 uprisings, and being in the Middle East and Bosnia and Somalia. And when you see those things, it's not possible to unsee them. So those images are with you. So when I hear the word peace, I see the young Kurdish man with half his face missing lying in a beautiful spring field of jonquils. And to me, the word is kind of written in fiery letters, and it is an obligation that other people don't have to see that, and that they don't have to live that, and that we somehow have to find a way. We need a paradigm shift here. We need to stop lionizing only military courage. There's a lot of moral courage in this society that is absolutely necessary if we're ever going to fight our way out of this brutal disease that afflicts us as a species. And so I think we need to start lionizing people who know how to speak civilly and negotiate and embrace difference.
I'm not even going to try to follow that up.
Another question? Is there anyone else? Yes.
Two.
Marlon, this is for you. I wonder if you have read Zora Neale Hurston's works?
Mm-hmm.
Have.
I have read Zora Neale Hurston's works. I tell you a true story, which will seem pretty surprising. When I wrote my first novel, the first draft, Elizabeth Nunez, who's a very good friend of mine and a fantastic writer, said to me, you're an okay writer, but you don't have a clue about women. Which is funny enough, since I wrote a book about 10 women. And I was like, so what are you talking about? My best friend is a woman. I'm from the Caribbean. I'm surrounded by strong women. And she actually meant I had no idea of the creative work of women, of women telling stories about women. And so, and it's true, like a lot of certainly a lot of male writers, I could go on and on and on about the men I read. But then I said, so who are the women you read? Oh, Jane Austen, who I love. I've said that 10 times since Saturday. So she pretty much gave me a list, and included lots of Zora Neale Hurston, large because I also really write in and believe in dialect as an authentic voice of fiction, which is what I learned from the Southern writers, not just from Flannery O'Connor, but also lots and lots of Eudora Welty. But certainly lots of Zora Neale Hurston. She also prescribed Toni Morrison and Iris Murdoch, who I am going to build a shrine to at some point. And that was it. It was just again, there are few things you can't solve by reading, really. And that's how I solve most of my problems. So that's how I ended up with going to Zora Neale. And then Alice Walker is such a huge champion of her. She single-handedly brought Zora back into the discussion about great American fiction. So and you know, and I owe a huge debt to her as well. So that's what happened.
She took flack for writing in dialect,
Mm-hmm.
and I wondered if there have been.
There is, and there continues to be. If a writer in the States chooses to write in, say, Ebonics, there will always be there'll always be a sort of course that this is setting us backward. That happened also in Jamaica. It happens quite a bit. They'll say, well, aren't you an English teacher? Why are you writing in broken English? I said, this is not broken. There's nothing in it that needs to be fixed. It is sort of a struggle, and one and I can only speak for really the Jamaican situation, where it also became a way in which to divide along class lines. I've educated my way to being a proper gentleman, so you shouldn't use that. But one of the things about, and if you should use it, it should be for slapstick. It should be the Jamaican step and fetch it and all of that. And one of the things that changed everything in Jamaica was reggae, where all these musicians who were speaking patois started to talk about very serious issues. And they actually had a head start. And a lot of writers probably won't admit it, but it wasn't until reggae records started being complex that we started to go, oh, this can be a tool, this can be a voice we can use to speak about serious issues. But there's still that conflict that goes on.
But if you were writing in the times, in slave times, you would use a slave dialect. They're not going to use the
not
English.
necessarily.
So for you to be authentic, don't you think it would be better for you to do what you did?
It would have been, but also a lot of the slave narratives are actually in standard English because they were written for a British or an American audience. So they were actually, Mary Prince's story, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, are all in standard English. One of the things, and I thought about that as well, but one of the things that led me back to dialect was Huckleberry Finn. And that sort of, surely you should have the character tell her story in her own way. Yeah. I think there's one at the back there.
This is way off the literary topic. I was wondering if the writers had any opinion about digitized books and how it affects the way they relate
Dave?
I publish books. We have a small company, and so the ebook phenomenon affects us. We're trying to navigate it right now, but I think it's a nice and ideally limited part of the market that caters to adults who travel or want the don't want to carry around a lot of books and things like that. Right now, ebooks know that it's not generally good for the author. The split is very unequitable right now, so it's not ideal. We're trying to fight back to make it a little bit better, and the business will only really survive and thrive if we continue to sell hardcover books, and that's the majority of at least the first run market. It's a lot better for everybody involved. And I'm a paper, I don't read it online. I can't deal with looking at screens for more than I already have to look at them. I just feel like a robot. But so I think that right now it's about 8% of the market, and I hope it tops out at about 15%, and then that's that. We all have a nice split. But think about this, if ebooks go too far, what is this bookstore doesn't exist? The readings don't exist. You're not going to get your ebook signed. You know what I mean? There's nothing to sign. There's nothing to share. There's no note on your title page from the author. There's not. It's a very, very different thing. So there's a slippery slope where if we go too far, if it takes over too far, and we'll just have to see it run its course, we could be in a drastically different place. And so I'm for the continuation and nurturing of the books on paper thing. And and you think about this place and you think about your own personal library, you want to walk past all the books that you've read and see all of your old friends and what you felt every time, or where you were every time when you read this one and that one. Ebook, all of that goes away. You don't have this sort of omnipresent sort of community of characters and authors that you've shared all this time with. And so I don't know. I think it's a necessary and ideally small part of the market and the environment, right? You guys have anything to add?
I hope you're right. I had a moment on a plane where I had taken Wolf Hall, which those of you who've seen, it's a very large novel. And I only had about 30 pages to go, but there was no way I was going to go without it because I had to know how it came out. And I finished it, and I'm still in, Boston airspace. And I try and cram it in the seat pocket in front of me, and I'm not succeeding. And the guy next to me, damn him, has a Kindle, and he finishes a William Faulkner novel, and then he starts another one. And I thought at that moment, yes, okay. Limited. I hope so, because, but then I also think about, when the first presses started to roll, the product was really crummy. I mean, if you try and read that early printed Word, it was really hard to read, and there were tons of misprints in it, and all kinds of transposed type, and I can imagine the manuscript illuminator sitting there at his podium and looking at that and going, yeah, they're always going to want illuminated manuscripts.
I'm not a technophobe in the least. I used to write a blog, and I think we thought TV was going to get rid of radio, and radio was going to get rid of whatever was before it, and photography was going to get rid of art. And in a lot of ways, what happens, well, hopefully it creates its own sort of niche, and they support each other. And I think that is what will happen. I was talking last night about how you can try to destroy the book all you want, it will survive you. And that's something Dave said a while ago, which I never thought of, but it's so true. One of the things, when I moved here, the first thing, I went on such a rapid book buying campaign. I have a library at home and one in my office. And some of those books I have never read and probably won't. But there is something about walking past the spines of books. And especially the ones that you read and when you read them, and just seeing your life and your growth and your enlightenment just play out in front of you, just walking past them. And that is the best I can describe it. It's way greater than that, but I don't think you're going to experience that if you turn books into something that's merely content, because that's what killed music, and that's the thing. It's no longer art; it's content. And I think the danger with not even a danger. That's something you have to deal with the e-bookification thing, is that it may become just content. And I think books are a lot more than that. It's amazing that something that never speaks to you talks to you all the time, and it's just every writer has that book that's their best friend. Not that we don't like people, we tolerate them, but there's always that book and the book you come back to.
Thank you so much. And there's just something therapeutic about feeling that book in your hand and those pages and turning them, I think, for all of us. Thank you to the three of you. Congratulations to the three of you. Also, thank you so very much for being here, all of you, and for taking these questions and sharing your works, and we just really, really appreciate it. I want to remind you that there is a book signing right after this, but first, I also want to let you know that former winners are in the audience today. Richard Bausch, author of Peace, fiction winner for 2009. Benjamin Skinner, A Crime So Monstrous, nonfiction, 2009. Brad Kessler, Birds in Fall, fiction, 2007. Audience, thank you. You've been wonderful. We hope you've enjoyed the food for thought as well as the food for your tummies, because everything has been absolutely great. And again, congratulations to the winners. And thank you to the authors, the writers who have reviewed their works. Thank you so much. Thanks.